Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to, although there's only one person from the JCSP, but that's fine. I'm really excited to talk to the audience. I remember every year you would have people posted from JCSP come to Ottawa. Usually they would use their posting leave to show up in like end of August, September, which means they wouldn't have used their annual leave, which means they would use it all in March. But they'd all finish OPP, and then that's how their brain would think. And then all solutions that they would, they'd all look at all problems through an OPP lens. And then they would almost take pride in it. It was an interesting development because they were competing with like Navy and Air Force officers. They would take pride on their knowledge of OPP over all others. To a competitive level. And so it's like doubling down on one way of thinking that might not actually have the right perspective on the way to approach a problem. So really hopefully what will come out of this meeting is just the way that you would use design thinking to make sure that you're walking into the room the right way instead of just like kicking it down as fast as possible and trying to solve the problem using the way that you've always been taught. So I'll share my screen and get right into it. So today's discussion is just digital transformation, navigating change management. Anyway, you don't have to read the whole thing. But like what I'm going to be talking about is like how do you bring in complex new systems or new ideas and processes into like a bureaucracy. It could be for any bureaucracy, and I'll go through with that as well. So we're just focusing on the military here, but like how does the military think? And they typically think using like a waterfall process, and like which is not a big deal. Like sometimes it's better to use waterfall than agile or scrum. Like there's certain reasons that you'd want to use waterfall, particularly if you have a bunch of the budget up front, and if there's certain like contracting aspects to it, you kind of have to run it as a waterfall system. But that's really how the military thinks about all their solutions, really, is like, waterfall. And they think that part of it is because like that's how capital procurement's done, and that's how the bureaucracy thinks in the military. And it has the exact same kind of like thought pattern of identification, options analysis, definition, implementation, and closeout. So that's how the federal government procures big solutions, and so that's kind of drives that culture and that way of thinking about it as well. But then also the military thinks about like a waterfall type of process because that's how the operational planning process looks as well. It's an initiation, orientation, co-development, plan review. And so like that's like that. So like if you took someone that played like football for like 20 years and then you tried to make them like play a different sport like that, you can't change that right away. Like that's how you think. But there's nothing wrong with that. There's a reason why the military thinks that way, and there's definitely some value in thinking that way. The reason why the military uses the operational planning process for brigades and division type work is because they're trying to take like a complex problem and move fast. Like you want to be able to give a plan to a brigade so that it either goes left or it goes right. And then you have to coordinate all the other like enablers onto that, the engineers, the artillery, the air, the logistics. And so if you had to go and start doing like a design thinking and really understand the problem, then you're definitely not going to be doing like that 12-hour OODA loop that you kind of want to do to drive like success in a brigade operations. Like so that's why we learn it that way. We learn to be able to do the operational planning process really quickly, so that way we can drive success at the unit, the brigade, and the division level. And the interesting thing though is that like you get used to using that so many times that you become a bit of a prisoner of that thought process. So there's nothing wrong with like those ways of thinking, waterfall, capital procurement, OPP. Those work really well when you're kind of working on a fixed problem where you have like this capability, you have like this limitations, you have this much time, and you've seen this kind of thing before. And so to kind of steal an analogy from another great thinker, it's a merchant with a map and a compass. So you're doing a simple and complex context. You are trying to get some stability in the process so you can have and use predictive methodologies. You want to be able to understand like what the brigade's trying to do, so that way you can get the staff to be delivering like a predictive methodology so they can drive success. Obviously there's some weaknesses which will go in with that, but many military use it because you can kind of rationalize it, you can optimize it, and that's the way that the military thinks. So obviously, like if you were to think of someone thinking that way for 20, 30 years, like that's how they think. And so when you go to Ottawa or any postings in any organization, like once you go to like a headquarters in the military, typically like they're going to want to build a strategy. They're going to want to like look at a problem and like build like a strategy or like have lines of operation, and they want to go from there to there because that's how they have been like thinking for the last 30 years. That's their comfort zone, and that's the tool that they use every day. And so the analogy, great book, I recommend, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, from Adam Grant, is he uses the analogy of what they call smoke jumpers, where like smoke jumpers would they parachute into a forest fire and they would go fight fires. And so there's been a lot of examples of it, but one example in particular, the forest fire changed. They had 10 firefighters had to move quickly, and the fire was catching up to them and they couldn't move fast enough. And so unfortunately, on one of the examples, like 9 out of 10 people actually like died because they got eaten up by the fire and they couldn't run away fast enough. What's the interesting component of that is that when they found the firefighters' bodies, a lot of them were still carrying the chainsaw and the tools that weigh like 30 pounds when they got eaten up by the fire. Like they didn't drop them when they knew that they weren't going to be able to move fast enough. And so they're so wedded to their tools that it's almost impossible for them to rethink, particularly when they're stressed, to look at it a different way. And one of the people that did survive, who is very, very, I guess you would call mentally agile, is he actually stopped and he took a bunch of matches out and he started lighting a fire around him because he knew he wasn't going to be able to outrun the fire that was coming from. And then he burnt a bunch of the field in front of him, and then he laid down with a cloth over his face and he let the large forest fire go over him in his burnt out area. So that's unusual. Typically people don't rethink on the fly like that. Typically people are wedded to their tools, like those poor firefighters that were still carrying their chainsaws when they're trying to run up the hill. And so you have to understand that when you're working in your environment, is that you can't expect people to automatically just shift off of a new environment and change. On top of that, for the military's point of view, is that you're also in a bureaucracy, which there's nothing wrong with a bureaucracy. Like bureaucracies are actually pretty important. They have hierarchies, they have rules, they have processes and powers. And they have to have that so that you can drive decisions. Like if you're in an organization with thousands and thousands of people, if you don't have processes and procedures, it's just chaos. And anyone that's worked in a startup from 20 people to 200 people, when you're 10 to 20 people, or when you're a platoon, you don't really, you might not need, because everyone kind of knows what they need to do, and they've kind of worked with each other and they can trust each other. They know what capabilities each person has. So if you were to use a platoon context, you might actually just know, because you've just worked with the master corporal really well, that he could cover off this, that, and this. And so it's more of a personal relationship to solve a problem. But once you get to an organization of thousands of people, you really need pretty, you need the consistency, you need the stability and continuity. And so there's good things about bureaucracies, but you have to understand that's where these organizations are coming from, and this is where you have to think about for design thinking on how you would change or drive a change. So understanding that you're working with militaries and military leaders that like typically just want to take like the higher level intent to drive out a strategy so that they can give a mission statement, so they can drive outcomes. And understanding that you're working with a bureaucracy that's going to have like hierarchies, rules, and processes that they're comfortable with. You have to work out like, how do I get user feedback and how do I drive a digital transformation for this environment? People can ask questions, by the way, at any time. One example where this kind of worked, it's the old FBI Sentinel project. If you haven't read it, Scrum, it's a great book called Scrum, How to Do Twice the Work in Half the Time. But essentially what happened after 9/11 is that like the FBI worked out that they had a lot of different signals across the FBI that, you know, the terrorists that for 9/11 were working on something, but they couldn't connect all the dots. And so they knew what they were trying, like they knew that there was a problem there, but they didn't really know the path of how to go solve it. So they went into market, as most organizations do with huge capital projects. They went for an RFP and said, hey, we want to build out the virtual case file system. We want to be able to take all these different things that are usually tracked on paper and pen back in 2001 and put into filing cabinets. We want to have it done in a virtual file system. Unfortunately, as you can read there, after 4 years, it failed because like nobody really knew where they were going, and like the initial requirements had changed over 4 years because like the technology is constantly updating. And so after a couple of years, they kind of lost its way. They're asking for more money. And so the FBI is like, we're not going to do that contract anymore. Let's cancel that, pull it, the contract in 2005. Let's start again with the Sentinel system. And obviously, as you can see on the thing there, on the slide there, like we're going to give more money to it. It actually went to $100 million over budget. But in 2010, it asked for another $351 million, and then they just pulled the plug. And so in that particular situation, like they didn't really know where they were going to go. They didn't really know how to add value, but they were trying to put in like a waterfall procurement process and project management into that space. And it wasn't adding the right value, it wasn't getting the right adoption, and it just died. So what actually ended up happening is they ended up hiring a couple of technology people that are like knowledgeable in the technology space. And then internally, they just hired a bunch of technologists, and they just used Scrum where they like talk to the end client. They iterated, they get constant every week. They had feedback from the client on like what exactly was required and how to add value to the organization. And they ended up building a solution in like less than 2 years, and it only cost $100 million. So like this, like the problem area that I'm talking about is not just like a military problem. Like this is how, like this is a problem for big organizations, for big bureaucracies. And it's the same thing for police organizations, for the FBI, is that they're kind of captured by what they know and how they think, and so it's hard to drive it. And so, you know, what you're hoping to do with a bit of design thinking here, and I got the quote wrong, and Matt corrected me, so I have to wait to know exactly who said this. But design is the act of innovation that leads the organizations to create that which is needed but does not exist. So how do you actually build out a solution where you don't actually know where you're going to go? You don't actually know where this is going to take you. There's no processes, there's no procedures. There's value there that you're not actually really tracking. And then that's where you're hopefully going to use design thinking to drive. And a great analogy is the explorer with compass to the edge of the map, is that you don't know what's going to happen when you go over the map. You have to kind of adapt as you go. You're going to be learning through design thinking and learning through the process. And this novel discovery tends to be misunderstood by, merchants seeking things already on the map. So this is kind of like the approach that I took probably like 3 to 4 years ago, where I was like, okay, how do we solve this problem? And so, so I was like, okay, I didn't really know it at the time, but I guess I was actually using like the design thinking model, systematic design, where I'm trying to work out like how does the whole ecosystem, like, what does the whole ecosystem look like? What's stopping this from happening? And like, how would we approach this problem? And so about 4 years ago, I kind of did an analysis as part of an Army project I was doing for, at the time, General Lanthier, but then General Eyre, for the managed readiness system. But a lot of the research that I was doing, it kind of framed how I was thinking about the problem for the Canadian military. And so what I learned for digital transformation is, first of all, there was no imperative to move. Like, there's no, if the military always thinks, okay, I'm going to take the higher intent, I'm going to do mission analysis, I'm going to put together a mission statement, and then that's going to drive me to go from A to B. There is not actually any direction from above telling you that you have to do it. So therefore, if that's how you think as a military leader or as a bureaucrat, like, you're never going to be able to get this going, because like, nobody's actually saying, this is what we have to do. You're ordered to do this. Make sure it happens. So pending war, there's no imperative to actually get going on this space and deliver an outcome. That's just the way that the current situation is. On top of that, like, certain bureaucracies and government bureaucracies, they don't actually have performance measures. Like, they don't have a thing saying, this year you will be 25% more effective, or you will be this, that, and the other thing. Like, there's no actual performance measures that are driving innovation in your department. And so to expect that that's going to help you drive what you're looking for also would be a fool's errand. An organization that actually does this quite well is a Crown corporation called CN Rail, as an example. And so their CIO, for example, he is compensated at the end of the year based on how many injuries that the CIO or the CTO can reduce. And you're like, how is the CTO reducing injuries? And so what he would be doing is he's working with his organization to work out, where does injuries happen? And typically for CN Rail, injuries happen when people are doing inspections on the train line and they twist their ankle. So he's like, okay, how do we reduce the twisting ankle situation by 20%? And so then his team is compensated to reach that performance measure, to then take video footage of every single rail car and do the inspections for the organization. So therefore, nobody has to walk down the line and twist their ankle. And so when an organization does give those performance measures with like clear ways that they have to achieve them, then that forces innovation to hit them. But then if you don't have that, then there's no imperative to move. And so you have no incentives to move. And so therefore you're it's hard to kind of work in that traditional, OPP structure where you're taking those, that and driving it. There's also no procurement vehicle to enable movement. Like if you're typically, I'm not going to go pick on any delivery of anything in particular, but like if you're going through like the capital project process, first of all, like you're thinking about a solution that hopefully you're going to deliver in 10 years. And so to map out what what the phone's going to look like in 10 years is probably the wrong way of looking at it. And so like not only will these capital projects probably be late anyway, but and delayed, but like they're probably not the right user stories to solve that problem in the future. So like that's not going to solve your problem. I also found that no knowledge on how to move. And it's just like some of your senior leaders grew up probably without real internet. Like that's just the age that they are. It's nothing wrong. That's just that's just what it is. And so their digital literacy is not that high. And so they need help. Like they don't know unless they're super curious, which by the way is like the most important leadership trait that you need in a bureaucracy. Unless they're super curious and have done a lot of the research on their own, there's no way or no reason that they would know what cloud is, DevOps, how to drive capabilities, what the SNA process is, what digital literacy they need for their level of command. Because like their whole job would have been learn OPP, be really good at brigade attacks, operational focused, and it's like not into capability development. The stream would be either be an EA and a G3. And so like there's been no reason for them to have like really thought about it. And so like to find a senior leader that knows how to drive it would be, you'd be finding like it'd be unusual. And then lastly, there's not enough talent to move. Like, I mean, the federal government is short like 20% of the IT positions in the federal government anyway. And so, so that's just baseline. But then like, as with any large organization, and particularly federal government, it's hard to actually find the talent to drive this. And I think, you know, not to pick on the poor signals trade, but I think they're under strength as well. So to dump this onto the signals trade and expect they're going to solve it would be impossible. So like, these are some of the understanding of the environment that you have to think of when you're like, how am I going to solve this problem for the Canadian Armed Forces to help them drive digital transformation? So what I came up with was I called for a digital insurgency, which I'm pretty open with because I actually wrote it in the Army Journal in the fall of 2021, and I told them exactly what I'm going to do. But I was acknowledging all those aspects that would be holding the military back. And so you can't expect that the senior leader is going to solve this for you. You can't expect that you're going to be able to procure your way through this. You can't expect that some kind of specialized talent is going to come in and solve the problem. And you can't expect that like that we're going to be able to somehow just dump this on the signals trade. Like, you're going to have to build an insurgency. And so for the last couple of years, that's kind of what I went across and did. And if you want to read the article, it's I can just send you the link afterwards. So the first thing about driving a digital insurgency is to encourage people to organize. And so first of all, we started doing like-minded meetups where we were trying to work out like, who's frustrated by this space and what are you working on and who do you know, so that you can start to organize a bit. And you have to be pretty curious during this phase. You can't just be like, let's write a strategy and like drive it. You're going to have to like go and kick tires, talk to end users, really understand like what needs to be iterated, what needs to be experimented on, what needs to be driven. And like the best way to approach it, and I'm really using Hack Your Bureaucracy, which is a great wealth of resource to read as well. It's a great book. Is you just ask people as if it's a mystery. Like, you might already know the answer, but like the whole point is to go around the whole CAF or the whole organization and say, like, why do you do that? Like, what's the assumptions that you've made or your organization's made? And why do you make that decision? And you're going to find some pretty interesting things. Most of it's going to be wrong, which is fine. You don't point it out in front of everybody. You just write that down. And so then you know that there's been assumptions being made here and here and here that are like destroying the entire process. And that's how you would go faster. Also, what you do, which you never share with anybody, is you do a stakeholder map where you work out who's the key players in the space that are not actually in the bureaucracy. This is something that I guess if you're an intelligence officer, you probably would do as part of your intelligence planning for counterinsurgencies, but it's not very intuitive for military officers because the way that you think with OPP, you don't typically think about stakeholder or change management. But it's a key aspect of understanding your environment and working out where you're going to spend your efforts and to start to frame the problem is by like understanding who actually the key players are across the organization. Hopefully by being curious, asking people to tell you about the mystery and working out who the key players are that you should be talking to, you'd start to work out what the Trojan horse is. Like, what is the actual thing that you can look to deliver that like you can use that as a way to drive the whole effort forward. And I'll give you a couple examples of what we did. And lastly, like, don't be a tourist. Like, actually get your fingers into the problem and like understand the problem. Don't just observe it from far away. So once you've organized, I encourage people to organize, and you're starting to get that like communication and start that shared consciousness around like key players. What you want to do is start focusing on the grievance. And so you start to, part of the last one, you still question the water cooler rules, so like why are people making assumptions? But then you start to build capstones where you can prove out, or use cases where you can prove out that we don't have to keep doing what we're doing. Like, and that's the great thing about like doing that networking and understanding the problem is you can understand like what the key friction point or the key narrative that's coming out of people. And I mean, the key narrative, to be honest, was like, hey, it's 2023 at home or when I'm going to work, like I can order a pizza when I'm leaving from my house, and I can track who's making my pizza, who's picking up my pizza, when they're going to deliver the pizza. Like, I can do all of that at home, but at work, I'm still using paper and pen to track like multi-million-dollar budgets. So like, how do you, like, that's the grievance you're going to hear. And so you got to focus on that grievance and say, okay, well, how do we deliver solutions that would do it? And then how do we show how easy it is to deliver? And so what we would typically do is, sorry, I'm working with Zoom on my laptop here. Here's an example of like a capstone that you would do to, I don't know if you guys can hear, I'm going to mute it so that I don't have to hear. But basically, so here's an example of like someone had a problem where they're like, hey, how do I track pace information? This is like a captain in the Intuitive that built out the solution. He didn't know anything about IT or tech beforehand, so we can't just use the fact that like, we should, we should just give this to signalers to solve it. That's not like the real solution. They're part of the solution, but they don't own the whole problem. And he kind of frames out like what was frustrating for him is that he had to report for formation all the pace data, all the statistics, and he couldn't get that information easily. And so this is an example where he basically took all that problem set and he presented the solution to like the military. Said, hey, this is how you can solve the problem. So like, you focus on the grievance, like, why can't I get this information? Why doesn't this information automatically download into my computer? And so that way I can have a dashboard that tracks all this. Why do I have to spend 3 days a week going and looking for that data every week? And so you start focusing on that grievance, and then you show people that are solving it, and then you can share it and share it and share it. And then hopefully that's kind of how like an insurgency is kicked off, as you start feeding that information across it. So here's an example where this young captain in the reserves is solving that for us and doing a great job. Okay, so the next thing you do is you help leaders to emerge. So you basically get them to tell their story, and then you allow people to go second. So as once people have seen that someone's done it, they're like, oh man, sweet. I'm just going to go right after them. I'm going to do the exact same thing. And so we're going to do an example for this one's here is the CTC, the Combat Training Center in Gagetown. Like, how do you build an app where all the instructors and all the students can get all their files and all their personal reports, and like when the course is going to change, instead of having to like find out in the morning PT session, how do they all get it on their phone? That's essentially what they're building there. OneDiv, how do you track all the information on internal systems so that way all your reports and returns can be automated? Outcan, this one over here. How do you, when you're deployed overseas on a posting, what has been happening till I guess now is that you don't have a D1 computer when you're posted to West Africa. And so to do all your, or Fort Leavenworth, like say if you were going to do JCSP in Fort Leavenworth, you don't get a D1 computer when you're down there. But then you still have to put all your claims, your personal information, your updates, all your posting and financials. You have to send it to the Outcan headquarters so that you can get your money every month. And typically that's been done by a personal email address, which is very unsecure. And so people would send all their personal information, all their claims, all that stuff by personal email. And so like that would be, so anyway, one of the leaders in the organization, the CEO of Outcan, he said, this is crazy. We should be building out a solution on the ECN, which they did. And so now every single person, he's just rolling it out now, where every single person that's overseas, instead of having to do it by personal email, and not know where their claim is. And then obviously the claim, like the clerk in Ottawa has like 19,000 emails. It's just a mess. Now, every single person can put their claim in through their phone. They can track where their claim is, who's it with, who's going to authorize it, when they're going to pay it. And all of it can be tracked through a client relationship management system. But this is just like leaders, like leaning in, delivering solutions, and driving the digital transformation. So you start to get them to tell their story about captains, majors, lieutenant colonels driving it, and that's how you really get the digital transformation going. So I'll give you a couple examples here. Tudiv is a great example here of what Tudiv's building. I'm going to mute it so I don't have to hear it. But essentially the problem space that they're trying to solve in Tudiv is that most reserve units have like 6 D1 computers, maybe. And so like nobody knows like when the exercises are happening, how to do any personal paperwork, when opportunities are happening. And they did one analysis where they worked out that like of the 3 hours that you would report to work as a reservist, like almost an hour would that be spent proving that you went to work, like to do the paperwork, to write in your timesheet, to get paid the timesheet. It's hugely inefficient. And so what TUDIV is looking at here is information security, transparency, and administrative efficiency is a huge problem in the reserves. And after doing a quantitative and qualitative analysis with the end users, once again, this is Major Dave Serapins. If you ever want to talk about what digital transformation is, he's in TUDIV. I highly recommend reaching out to him. He worked out that like the soldiers want to master their soldier skills, fulfill their duty as a soldier, and balance needs with civilian life. And their pain points is that they couldn't plan ahead. They don't know what exercises are happening, what training events are happening, what operations are happening. When they did show up to training, a lot of it was wasted. And they want to take courses and learn, but there's no way for them to get access to that. So anyway, the simple answer for that is basically you just you build out an app that's secure, fully bilingual, mobile application available on your personal device, and it kind of looks like this. Obviously, the actual iteration looks different from this. This is just the initial proof of concept, but you have all your information about your readiness on there, so you can change your readiness almost immediately. You can put your family plan together. Hey, I want to go to the range because I haven't shot forever. I'm not valid range. And then how do I book time in the range? Like, do I have to just talk to my chain of command and they book it for me? Or is there other ranges that are happening of the reserve unit that shares the same armories? Are they going to the range? Can I go to the range with them? And so this enables so much more communication across the organization to enable the soldier to get engaged. And more importantly, for a domestic operation, that way people that are available to support for 5 days, 10 days, if anyone's had to be the G3 of a domestic operation and working with reserves, you can work out who's available, what day they're available, and then what information they need so that they can deploy, which is all just on the phone, which is great. And then if, organizational chart, you can make organizational charts ad hoc for a domestic operation or for their own chain of command. And then you have like official lines of communication instead of what has been going on in the reserves. When you don't have official lines of communication, it's like WhatsApp back group, Facebook, and so like who really knows what was said? It's not official. This is how it's official. And so, that's an example of like when someone builds something, you tell everyone, hey, like, there's a hero, follow the leader and do what they're doing. And that's how that would be phase 3. I can show you the other example as well. Another one would be like to try and drive people like a better transition from the, so when you're leaving the military right now, typically you just get like a white, like a Word document with like 6 locations you're supposed to go to, and you get physical signatures on it, which is not the best transition process. And so, wouldn't it be nice to have an app on your phone on the ECN where it puts all the information for you, and then it just maps out based on what you're trying to do. Obviously, I got too many things on the go here. There you go. So it'd be able to map out like what business process you're looking to solve. And so the key would be, I'm going to pause it there while it has the circle of death. But the key would be that like a lot of people aren't actually looking to just release. They just don't know of other opportunities that they have. So how do you link them into reserve opportunities, public service opportunities, other career opportunities, and particularly like the young soldiers, like they don't have the ability just to walk over to the base BPSO and be comfortable with that. Like how do you kind of set the conditions so that they can go chase it down? So that's where you were trying to do here, trying to get people to have second careers, component transfer, kind of enable that business process, make it accessible to all the soldiers. How do they do the training so they can engage that? What's the business process to set them up for those opportunities? You kind of automate all that as well, so they can go and do How do you translate your prior learning, your skills based on MySet, which is a national translator, and then potential? How do you put that all into one app where people can like apply to local transition center and find those opportunities? And so at the end of it, what you're hoping is that people can see, oh, there's another trade I can do. I have the aptitude, I have the skills, I have the ability to switch over. And that changes the whole relationship that people have. And that's how you solve a retention crisis. So anyway, so, you know, you basically, you'd help leaders to emerge, and you'd tell that story and show examples of them pulling that off. And then you start creating a group identity and start recruiting your members to the cause. So I guess this is kind of where everyone would be, this is where the step we probably are at this point, where you would try and drive like the larger culture change and try and scale it. So like the people that have been successful, they have to map out how they did it so that there's process to the insurgency and like how they were able to move quickly. You want to have that playbook. You want to share that playbook across the CAF. And then you want to start getting senior leaders interested in the insurgency so that way they start getting engaged and start removing blockers from the organization. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd have senior leaders that want to drive it. And I'm going to shout out to a great example of this, which was he was the commander of the Navy, it was Admiral Lloyd. But when he was the deputy commander of the Navy, what he used to call himself was two-star Drano. And what he would do is he would give like a data problem that he'd want to have solved every week or every 2 weeks, and he would follow up 2 weeks later. He's like, okay, did you give me that data? Because I'm going to be making decisions about it with or without that data. So preferably I have the data. And then if the team couldn't get the answers that he was looking for, or they couldn't automate the way he was hoping for, he would ask why. And then they would say, well, we had this blocker, this blocker, this blocker. And then he would call himself two-star Drano. He's like, sweet, I'm going to go remove those blockers for you so that way you can move faster. In a perfect world, you would have that. But if you don't, then you're going to have to create the insurgency below. You're going to have to test and iterate and see what works. You're going to have to share across the stakeholder map. And then you're going to have to take a few villages, a couple of capitals, and then hopefully you take the country at the end of it. So, that's like 40 minutes in because I wanted to have a chance to answer any questions. So I'll stop sharing. But yeah, that's essentially what I've been working on with a bunch of other people, and that's how you would use design thinking to look at this problem.
Thanks, Caleb. Great presentation. So while folks start thinking maybe about added questions, I'm going to go with one that was asked. So I won't ask the first one. I'll let it go. There's a question from Brad. He says, on the hire talent piece, how do you suggest upskilling and reskilling when lateral hires aren't an option?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, so you definitely want to do that. Like you want to, like the great thing about the military is it's actually one of the best skills-based hiring and talent management organizations in the world. Like people have been using skills-based hiring in the Canadian military for like hundreds of years. And so like I can use an example of that, I guess, if I was to bring up another presentation that I put together. But like the way that we build out capabilities in the Canadian military or any real military is that we'll look at what that deployment is supposed to look like. And I'll bring it up here as soon as it starts working. Open, there we go. Yeah, so typically the good news for you is that like other organizations around the world are only just starting to get there. But like typically the way that the military plans is like say, it's okay, we're going to deploy this task force to Afghanistan or wherever. And then what skills do we need? Like what collective skills do we need? Like they need to be able to do battle group attacks. They need to be able to do company attacks. They need to be able to integrate these subunits. Like they work out the collective skills. And then they work out like the collective training or the mission-specific training you would have to do to prove that you have those competencies to deploy. And then before they would go do the collective training, they would work out the individual skills that they need. Like we need a certain number of section commanders to be able to deliver this successfully. And then they'd work out, okay, how many section commander courses do we have to run? And then they would be looking at the aptitude of all the, especially if they mobilize a lot of people. Sometimes we have to deep select a bunch of privates to become master corporals and section commanders so that they can be, and then they had to do that. So that's how, so the military is pretty comfortable with that. The problem where it goes off the rails is that they're used to their lane. And so when you start to pitch in more complex environments like a counterinsurgency or domestic response, then they don't know what skills you would need to solve that problem. So what I would do is lean into a skills framework. There's lots of them out there. I would recommend the skills framework for the information age, which is a widely used skills framework around the world, where you're like, okay, to drive this, and this, our organization needs this skill, this competency, this competency, this competency. And then how do we build that competency? And like you said, you're probably not going to just go and hire people. So then you would upskill people that have the aptitude to learn that skill quickly, prove that they can do it, and then you would get them on to the job. And what I would probably say to you is that most organizations that you have across the CAF that are working in this space probably don't have the right competencies to drive it. Nothing against them. It's just like they don't know what competencies they need to be successful, or there's assumptions being made, or they don't know the process. And so what you would do is work out like, okay, you need these 10 competencies in this shop. I don't even have to name like the directors of that. And then you're trying to work out, okay, who are we going to upskill to solve those competencies, or who are we going to post in to solve these competencies? And then we work out as a team what our process is, and then we go. And so like that's how the military has been doing stuff for hundreds of years. It's just when it gets complicated, they automatically just think like, oh, it won't work here. But it does. Like this is how like banks build SOCs. This is how like large teams in like consulting companies put together like project teams of like 50 people. Like they work out like what's the solution we're trying to drive, and then what does this team need to be able to provide, and then what skills are we missing, and then how do we upskill those people, and then what's the best people that have close to the same skills or the aptitude to deliver, and then you would just do the same framework from left to right to deliver. And so yeah, you would definitely do upskilling and reskilling, because the value, Brad, I guess to kind of keep going on it, is that the value that upskilling and reskilling internal to the military would have is that they understand the business process. And it's always easier to upskill the culture than to try and like change the culture of the new people that you're bringing in that are And so they already know the assumptions that are made and why things are done the same way. They already understand the end user. They're already able to give so much more value to the organization than if you just bring in, you should definitely bring in some people that have outside experience and have a different way and perspective of the problem so they can kind of drive the conversation. But like realistically, preferably you just use internal talent to drive this yourself, and because they'll have a better network. Like it's always better to take like a major or a lieutenant colonel that's just finished JCSP and knows like 100 other people that they just did the course with to understand like how to solve this problem and drive digital transformation, because they already know like 100 other people from JCSP that they've networked with where they can like lean into and drive solutions that way. And then they can, and then they also know the business problem. They also know the organization, and so they're able to drive it better than to try and bring in somebody from like another country or another department, and then just like hope that it all works out. So I guess that would be the way that I would look at that. Does that make sense, Brad? Yeah. Sorry, that was a long answer to it.
No, it's a good answer. It's important. It's one of the strengths that you and with you with me brings that is revolutionary in some sense. I'll ask the next question. So as you know, and some of you know, I'm in business, and one of my challenges is to have government, federal government, but defense after my conflict of interest, use properly GIS to their advantage. Use the tools that they already have. Generally, it's not about sales, it's about adoption. And of course, one of the obstacles to that seems to be the bureaucracy. So I'm puzzled by your point. Don't try to make the bureaucracy care. And perhaps if you can, therefore, explain it a bit better and contrast how that's different than trying to engage senior leaders and have them be curious about what is in the realm of the possible.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So what I meant by don't try and make the bureaucracy care is don't try and personalize it to make to drive your solution. Like the bureaucracy, like individually, they may be like really interested about the user story, and that's how you actually deliver a great product to, say, like an organization that's going to be using GIS to drive success on operations. But like the organization, a bureaucracy doesn't care about that. Like you have to like give them the metrics and the data to show efficiencies or ways to meet some kind of business outcome that's written in some paper somewhere, to show that is useful. And so, like, if I was trying, like, I think the Canadian military just put together like a reconstitution order out just recently. Like, what parts of that reconstitution order or what part of the digital strategy is this linked to? So that way, I should be trying to solve the bureaucracy's problem. And that's how bureaucracies think, because that's how hierarchies, risks, decisions are made in bureaucracies. So yeah, like don't like lose faith or get frustrated because like this is supposed to solve the problem for the troops on the ground. Most bureaucracies don't care. So like, how do I actually like use the actual system, kind of not against them, but like use the system of which they live to drive the solution that I'm looking for, knowing that you care about the end user and you care about their story, but like you're trying to get to it. So that's unfortunately how you have to drive things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. If I had to paraphrase, I say don't over focus on the value case as the sole approach to getting results. You've got to yourself swim with the bureaucracy, even though it's full of wrong directions and sharks in this. You got to understand it to kind of leverage it. And it implies a shitload of patience, to use some good French here, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. It's definitely, okay. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with bureaucracy. You just got to understand like that's the environment you're working with. Because you can only hack the bureaucracy so much. If people find out that you've built an entire business process where you've like gone around something because you wanted to make it work, there'll be like a negative. You'll be kind of considered like a antibody, which I'm talking from experience. And so you have to like actually formalize the better business process and to enable people to follow. And typically, hopefully you would show senior leaders like, oh, this is a good way of doing it. And then they would buy into it, and then they would change the policy and procedures, and then they would enable it. So that's how I would look at it.
You get a good follow-up question from Andrew Curtis, who we know from the RCMP. It's nice to see you, Andrew, by the way. The question is, what is your impression or insight of the current state of the insurgency on digital transformation within the CAF or other government security agencies? Because I know you do work with lots of other clients, I'll call them, than just the CAF. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's tough. I guess what I would recommend is that the government agencies share information across government agencies. Like I find that like the Canadian Army or the Canadian Navy or the Canadian Air Force would be more likely to talk to their U.S. counterparts than they would be to talk to their other services. I find that's the same thing with the government departments as well, is that like you kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to go talk to this other country before building up a large network in Canada, which is interesting. And I don't know what that is. Like, so an example is that in a smaller country, so say take New Zealand, when they do their JCSP, they actually have other government departments on their JCSP, and that helps you build out a relationship and network across government, so that way you can kind of like learn from other government departments, and you can kind of get a sense of like, has people done this before, or am I just doing this for the first time? How can I steal or borrow or whatever way you want to say it to go faster? And for like a relatively small country, when you really think about it, I mean, you wouldn't want to be the United States, obviously, which is enormous, or even the UK is quite a large bureaucracy. Like you don't really see a lot of like networking and relationships at that major level. And so when it really goes off the rails is like when you have like a 1-star general who's responsible for, say, like a Kandahar, and they might not know any of the government departments at all. They have no network, they have no trust, they have no relationships. And so therefore, like there's no cooperation. And so, how do you solve this problem? Like, I could yell to the clouds about how there's no, actual national security policy or national security framework, or like that none of the material in Shared Services Canada makes any sense. And I could just keep ranting and raving about that, but like that's not going to solve the problem. But what I would recommend is that, like, really at the rank of like like manager, deputy director, or like major lieutenant colonel, is that there should be like a pretty significant like security focused, and like this is something I wanted to make actually when I was in the Army, and I never did it. And hey, Matt, maybe you and I could probably get this going. But like it's like every month, people should just be having coffee with each other, and they should be saying, "Hey, I'm in government. You're in government. You're at RCMP. I'm in like the Army. This is what I'm doing." And they're like, "Oh, we're doing the exact same thing. Oh my God, we should just share our solutions and go faster." And like that should just be happening all the time, because then when you're directors and you're like 1-stars, then you have that relationship where you're like, I want this to happen, and this is how this city works. And if I don't know how the city works, then I should be talking to that DG or that ADM that I know personally, and they'll give me guidance on how I get this memorandum to cabinet to work or whatever. And you kind of see, like, this is how the Americans kind of hacked it. Sorry to go too much at this one here, Matt, is like they would do a presidential internship. Like this is what Colin Powell did when he was a major. He went and worked for the presidential internship. It's like 20, 30 people from across, military, government, public, private sector. And they would do an internship for like a year as an executive assistant for Colin Powell. I think he worked for like infrastructure or something. I don't know, like some like other department that he wasn't really comfortable with. But he was able to build out relationships. That's why he became the national security advisor. That's why he became arguably is probably why he became the Joint Chiefs, is that he had so many relationships across these departments that he was able to move faster. And so, like if you're focused on process and procedures at JDCP, you're probably wasting your time. Like the key is networks and relationships and trust. That is what you need, because that's the only way that you're going to be hacked the system. And so, like, I guess in a roundabout way, like that's what I would say immature in the like government, GOC, security agencies, insurgency, because nobody talks to anybody. and so like that's how I would do it. Like how, like if and just, I know we're kind of running out of time, but like if public safety is responsible for RFPs for like floods, fires, like whatever, like, and most of the time the answer is like military. Like, why is there not like majors and lieutenant colonels, like knowing every single public safety person, and they're hanging out and they're talking and they're like, this is how I would do it. And they're building that relationship and that framework. So that way, like together, they learn how to solve this problem together. And it's just, there's no, I guess the answer is that there's no imperative and there's no incentives for that to happen. But like when you start to do joint agency work, like if you don't have that trust or relationship, then like it's just like nobody talks. And I wrote a good paper about that actually. It's in the Canadian Army Journal, the Canadian Military Journal. If you ever want to read it, it's like anyway. I'll send it to you later.
I am curious, Caleb, and I think this entire group is. The last question is the one that can open lots more questions. And I encourage anybody to contact you, right, if they have questions.
Yeah,
because you're part of that insurgency and it means talking to each other. And I'm happy to entertain any discussions as well. But you clearly have great passion and expertise on these topics. I suspect all of GCSB and all folks who see this will want to be part of that digital insurgency, because there's a generational, call it the digital natives. There's a generational advantage that needs to be leveraged, and we don't have the mechanisms right now for the CAF and other organization to leverage it. So thank you. I got to say, we all know what courage is under fire. But courage when you're in business is to do live demos. So kudos on the live demos today. Very well done. Thank you for your presentation today and your discussion and your access to all of us. Oh, see, I see in the chat here, there's a digital club on the GCSP. I think both of us will want to dig into that and to learn. And I'm just certain that, maybe Andrew from the RCP may be interested. So on this, for the sake of time, folks, I will wish you all an absolute great day. Do get in touch any which way with Caleb or his team is with you, with me, or keep researching materials. Brilliant work. Cheers, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. Thanks everyone for your questions. And yeah, the key is to share information across the departments as fast as possible and building out those relationships. But yeah, thanks very much for your time. Stay curious. Number one most important senior leader is to be curious. But anyway, thanks very much for your time.